Um, so we're just going to record it so that other people can join in. Again, just be aware of things that you might want to say or not want to say. What we did last time was we actually edited everybody's voice out and people just got the slides, and that seemed to work really well. So today we're going to talk about making the most of meetings. It's great from my perspective to see some new faces here, but also without being ageist in any way, some old faces, some familiar faces that I recognise. And I think the fact that some faces are recognisable for me really reflects the fact that our community is growing and it's coming closer together as it grows, which is a real positive from my perspective. My name is Helen Morgan. I'm going to facilitate the session today, but hopefully there will be lots of opportunities for you to join in, contribute, share your ideas, and listen to each other as well. I think the best sessions always happen when the facilitator stops talking and hands it over to the group. So that's one of the things that we're going to try to achieve today. I'm just going to briefly introduce two of my colleagues. I'm going to introduce Caroline, the wonderful Caroline. Caroline works behind the scenes and makes sure that things like this actually happen. So Caroline, do you want to say hello to everybody? I don't know if you've got Caroline there. She might have gone off to do something else, but she set everything up today. So thank you to Caroline. I'm also going to introduce Sarah Kupke, who is our head of professional learning. Sarah, do you want to say hello to everyone?
Yeah, just good morning from this part of the world. Good evening to you, and how delightful that we've got so many people here today, despite the hectic schedules that you're all running. So welcome and thank you. I'm head of professional learning at ECIS. You're welcome to get in touch at any time if it's helpful to you. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Sarah. And I'm just looking at the chat and spotting that there are connections between people already, which is just great to see. It's the best bit of all of this. So we're going to talk today about making the most of meetings. Just before we do that, you know, I'm delighted to work on behalf of ECIS. It's a real privilege, and we are a growing community. There are lots of things for middle leaders, like our middle leader courses. Barb has joined me on many of those, and it's great to get to know people on those. They're an excellent opportunity to bring middle leaders together. Obviously, we've got the cafes, but I think another thing that's really worth flagging for all of you in middle leadership roles is our mentoring platform. And if I'm really lucky, Sarah might share a link for that in the chat.
Yes.
It's voluntary, it doesn't cost anything. You can either go on there and you can seek out a mentor to support you with your next step, but also there's an opportunity for all of you to be mentors as well and to help somebody else with their next step and really support them. And I think for me, it's a great reflection of the way that we want to work, that actually what we do is we hold our hand out and we really try and help each other, no matter what our career stage and no matter where we are in the world. Just a quick opportunity now for you to say hello to each other. So just in the chat, if you can, just share your name, where you are, perhaps your school, so that you can connect with people who are perhaps nearby or who say something that you're really interested in today. And just one thing that you'd like to get out of the meeting today in terms of making the most of meetings. And I'm going to try really hard. And when we talk about meetings, we often say death by meeting. I'm hoping that this isn't going to be a death by meeting for all of you. So that's my goal today. So just take a minute to say hello to each other. Let's see who we've got in the room. It's great to see WAB colleagues as well. I've done lots of work with WAB across the last year, and it's been really, really great to be part of that. Fantastic. Liz, it's great to see you. Fantastic. Okay. Great to see so many here. And like I say, you know, make connections with people, engage with each other. I think it's really worthwhile doing. So again, if you want to join the Twitter community, you'll find us at ECIS Schools. You'll find me on Twitter at Helen Morgan EC. And again, the community is building online. There are lots of conversations taking place, not just on Twitter, but also on LinkedIn, if that's something that you use as well. So just, you know, take a minute to hunt each other out today while you're online. As always, a quick run through the Zoom protocols, just about, you know, being present while you hear cameras on. You're a dream group for that. Again, just having that level of trust with each other. I will bust the mute button at least 3 times in the next hour, so I'm going to apologise in advance. Perfection is the enemy of progress. Use the chat, join the breakouts, and really share the airtime. Let's make the most of the next hour. So we've got 3 goals to think about what makes a meeting really effective, to take the opportunity to share some strategies, some approaches, and some top tips that help meetings to be more effective, and also from your perspective to have some time and space to just reflect a little bit on, you know, your own meetings and perhaps things that you'd like to turn the volume up on, things that you'd like to get rid of, or things that you'd like to change. And all of those things are really valid in this context. You don't get a lot of time to think as a middle leader, and just having some space to do that with colleagues is brilliant. And Zachary, I love it that we've got an extra member today. Go on, tell us who this is. It's my favourite bit of any Zoom. It makes us human.
My apologies. I know that that's not really the couth way to approach a professional meeting, but he won't leave me alone. So yeah, there's a little monster here. It's a bit of a challenge. Yeah. Please carry on. I'll try to keep him out of focus.
We're going to start to give them all kind of a membership to ECIS. Bob's cat always joins us, doesn't he, in meetings? So it's always my favourite bit, and the best bit is when the best bit is when we get a small child who comes to join us as well, who joins in. That's always a favourite. Anyway, it's great to see you all. So let's get started and let's get you involved. Just take a minute to think about the most effective meetings you've attended across, you know, maybe the last year. Just think about 3 words to describe those meetings and share those 3 words in the chat for me. What is it that made them effective? Okay, some great responses here. Okay, Erica, go on, start us off because you've got a really interesting response there. Let's hear from you.
Are you able to hear me? Amazing.
Yeah.
I've had tech problems all day. Okay. I said the idea of being structured, obviously having something to follow and know what's happening. I also really like that there's a purpose and we all are behind that. And then that every person is seen and heard so that no one's an anonymous kind of low liar in the meeting, and that the leader of that meeting sees and hears everyone in the room.
Yeah, and I love that idea of inclusivity, and Sarah and a few colleagues have really picked up on that about people being really seen and heard in a meeting, and how do we actually make that happen? Again, let's come to Let's have a look. This one that really interests me. James, this one appeals to me. Clear purpose, clear preparation, clear outcomes. Go on, tell me why you said that.
Because not having clarity on those three things, you end up just waving around. So you might feel good about the meeting afterwards, but it's really, there's no feelings isn't enough sometimes. Sometimes there needs to be actions, and there needs to be a go forward with the meeting.
Yeah.
And I think that's also like there's a lot of cultural elements in meetings, right? We all do things in a cultural framework, and having worked in Japan, you know, it's really important. Often the actual decisions are being made before the meeting, and so the meeting is to make sure that everyone is heard and everyone feels good about it. Whereas, you know, I'm from New Zealand. No, you get the job done. It has to be really clear. I don't really care about feelings. It's boom, 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 right? So we're all working in a cultural element. Yeah.
So I think that kind of intercultural awareness when we're thinking about meetings is really important. And Liz, you know, I could see you kind of putting a thumbs up there. What are you connecting with in terms of what James has just said there?
Oh, it's just always, you know, good to hear another Kiwi accent, really. That was what was sort of connecting to me. Interestingly, I sort of come from a slightly different background than James in New Zealand. And one of the things that we do, again, it's from a different cultural perspective, and it's becoming more dominant in New Zealand, is the respect and the relationship is built before the meeting. So there's time taken to actually acknowledge the people at the meeting and talk a little bit about the connections before we start. And that's really important, I think, to create that sort of bond before you go.
I mean, I agree with that. And I think that point of getting people involved quickly and hearing voices and making connections through, whether it be the chat, really matters, because that's what unlocks the discussion and the dialogue. And, you know, I always think when you're having a meeting, it's always good to try and have just 10 or 15 minutes of coffee time pre a meeting, where people can do that check-in with each other, they can connect, and just relax a little bit into the meeting. Whereas if people are dashing in as it begins, is your head in the right space for that meeting? And if meetings are going to be productive, we need to try and get into that headspace and create that connection. Jenny, you've mentioned connection as well. But you've also put time management and goal oriented. Go on, tell us a bit more about your perspective.
Yeah, I also agree connection with people is quite important, especially before the meeting, so that people feel comfortable to share. And management also, I think it's important. It bugs me personally if the meeting is supposed to finish at 5 and at 5 it still goes on, and I would like the host to give people the option to leave or to stay. So that's why I put time management there.
I think that there were lots of smiles there as you said time management. Go on, Chris, you're smiling and you're right in front of me. Tell me what you're connecting with about that, because I think there's general agreement there.
Sorry, did you say Chris?
Yeah, please.
Just been in meetings where, yeah, like Jenny was describing, right? When the meeting is supposed to end, you realize you're just coming up on the main. It's kind of rude, I guess, and your time doesn't feel valued. And at the end, probably you get not, the things that you wanted to get done.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. And I think that valuing people's time when you're chairing or leading or facilitating a meeting is absolutely critical. And, even having somebody on the time saying we need to move on now and putting times on your agenda is really, really helpful. I also think about, the sequence of your agenda, putting the important things first and making sure that you really cover them matters. And I don't know, I've been in meetings where people have had standing agenda items, and they sometimes just fill in time for the sake of it. They're there because they've always been there. And for me, it would be worth, again, just auditing those standard agenda items and auditing some of those meetings and thinking, are they really necessary? If you cancel them, would people miss them? And doing that for a couple of weeks, you suddenly realize which meetings matter and which meetings people aren't too bothered about. Barb, let's hear from you, because you've made a really important point there as well about, not just information sharing.
Yeah, well, at our school, we have collaborative meetings once a week. And I, as an MYP coordinator, when I run my meetings, they are about collaboration. I provide some guidance, and then I use the time for interaction and collaboration among my team. But at the same time, our school often has announcements at the beginning of the meeting, and sometimes that can take 20-30 minutes, and then that eats into the collaboration time. So and a lot of the stuff has been announced in we have a weekly notice that goes out every Monday, and it's been announced there, and I feel like there's a lot of redundancy, and we need to kind of try to avoid things like that.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point, and I know somebody's kind of said in the chat, sometimes kind of everything can become an email. For me, I think there are three things to really think about. Is the meeting about building understanding, in which case it needs to be more than an email? Is it about making a decision? Or if it's about giving notices, can that just happen on a piece of paper or kind of, via an email? I'm a huge fan of not emailing everything, and, kind of sometimes putting the piece of paper in front of people, because it actually makes you pick it up and read it. And sometimes starting a meeting with just that information on a piece of paper is much more likely to get people to engage with it. But I am aware of trees and, being eco-friendly. So it's a fine balance in a good school. If we kind of turn that on its head then and say, what's the worst thing? And I think we've touched on some of these. What's the worst thing about poor meetings? Again, just 3 words to describe the worst meetings that you've ever attended. Great question, James. Let's see what comes up here. What 3 words describe the worst meetings? I knew we'd have some fun with this one. Liz, start us off.
I think the worst ones I can think back to are ones where you get, I'm not very fond of people who use EduSpeak fluently, because for me, it seems to mean that you're covering for the fact you don't know a lot. And so when you have meetings and you have somebody who's in leadership and all they do is EduSpeak at you for an hour, it makes me lose all hope of life, really.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Again, Simon, you've put the disrespectful environment, and I think being respectful in meetings is really important. Go on, talk us through that.
Hiya.
Hiya.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I think when you have a meeting and it's clear that they're not listening, someone is not listening to what you're saying, or people are not being listened to, then I find that's like disrespectful. So I think earlier in the previous question, some of the answers were having people that listen to understand. I think that's really important. When people don't listen to understand, they just pretend to listen, or they feign listening, and then they just continue talking the same thing. That's kind of not a good meeting, because that's just passing information out rather than actually trying to get people's opinions about things and discuss things.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. We've got other comments like, they're very either leader heavy, dominated by one person who doesn't share the airtime. I often call them Billy Big Mouth. It's the person who doesn't listen to anybody or anything, but just wants to hear their own voice. So if we kind of think about different types of meeting, there's a great book that I recommend called Death by Meeting by Patrick Lencioni. And he kind of talks a lot, he uses a fable to tell a story about, terrible meetings and why meetings often aren't successful. But he does put forward some solutions. And he suggests that, as a team, maybe you need 4 different types of meeting. Has anyone come across this before? Just before kind of I plow on. So again, if you have, feel free to kind of chip in. He says that the first kind of meeting is the daily huddle. And this is where the team just come together for literally 5 minutes. There's no agenda. And it's just that checking in with each other about maybe things that have emerged, things that you might just need to share with each other very, very quickly, not via an email. And what he kind of says is you don't have to have everybody there. You have to have whoever can be there, because it's better to have 3 or 4 people that day on the same page than to have nobody on the same page. I tend to call the daily huddle just checking in, but I think it's a really valuable opportunity for people just to come together for 5 minutes and sort any quick things out that need to be sorted. Barb, I saw you put your hand up there. Anything that you'd like to contribute on the daily huddle?
Not so much the daily huddle, but I was at a school where once a week we had the stand up 15. So we'd show up for 15 minutes and make sure everybody was on the same page. Everybody knew what was going on, if there were any questions to be answered, and then we were dismissed, and that was it. And so, again, it was just a check-in, a little bit of community building, and not a lot of pointlessness to it.
Yeah, and I think there's some value in that. I think, for me, with my team, we used to kind of just stand together on the gate on a morning as we welcomed students into school, and the daily huddle usually happened then. And again, often there were things that we just shared very, very quickly. But it really helped us to have a more productive day. He then talks about the weekly tactical meeting. And that's where, you just look at how the week's going, things that are coming up for the next week. And it's about making sure that you get the things that need to be done. It's quite an operational meeting as opposed to a strategic one. He then kind of moves into the monthly strategic meeting, where you're really thinking about the progress that you're making towards the team goals. And that's a meeting where you need to be around a table, you need a clear agenda, and you need to be not just looking at now, but looking at things that have happened before and progress that you're making with those, but also looking forward at next steps. And then the last piece is the quarterly review, where again, you're just taking a step back and looking at that bigger picture and asking that question of, how well are we doing? How do we know? And how do we get better against the goals that we've set for ourselves? I don't know if anybody wants to come in. James, you raised a really interesting point earlier in the chat that you might just want to kind of pick up now, which is, are meetings the places to build communities? Any thoughts that you'd like to share on that and how that perhaps relates to this?
Yeah, I guess.
Go on, go for it.
No, there are different types of meetings, and I guess that's what the comment was about. I mean, there are different sorts of meetings. Sometimes there was, as I was describing before, a purposeful, you need to make decisions and outcomes and clarity. Those sorts of meetings don't build communities. Often they're under pressure, often they're with a clear purpose, and they need to be boom, boom, boom. They definitely don't need a cup of coffee, right? You definitely need to be making decisions, right? There's other kinds of meetings where, yeah, it's really good just to sit down and have a chat with people, and perhaps, I don't know, you can call them whatever kinds of meetings. Often they're thinking about playing out possibilities into the future, you know, different types of possibilities or that you might want to try to create in some way. That's great as well. But I think the idea of saying all meetings should be one is I guess what the point I was trying to make it. No, there's different things for different purposes. Yeah.
Yeah, and that really kind of fits with that approach from Lencioni, doesn't it? So if we kind of push on, I'm going to kind of just throw some ideas on the table, and then maybe give you a chance to process and talk about these. I think when we think about brilliant meeting basics, we've started to kind of get to these through some of the discussions that we're having, you know, having a clear purpose, establishing your group norms, setting and circulating an agenda in advance, getting everyone involved, starting and ending on time, and having some clear action points at the end of the meeting. And I think for me, the clarity of those action points is really, really important. And again, we're talking with this about a round table meeting. I think group norms play a really important part in this. You know, there are some typical ones on there. I think one of the ones that I think, again, that really kind of gets me thinking about this is, you know, I want people to turn up to a meeting feeling prepared. I want them to have had a look at the agenda, to have done some thinking, to have done any reading in advance, so that actually the meeting is as purposeful and productive as possible. And I think it's important to get that agenda out early. One of the things that I've used before is in our team room, it used to be in my office, was just a whiteboard on screen, on the wall. And people would just contribute things that perhaps they wanted to raise on the agenda as we went through the week. And that meant that when we got to the meeting, there were no surprises. There was no kind of any other business derailing the whole meeting, that we could pick that up. I could put it into an agenda that was sequenced carefully, or say, I know that's important, but we're not going to cover that this week. We're going to cover it in 2 weeks' time. But it made sure that everybody felt heard and that everybody had some ownership of that agenda. I also think devices are a really interesting one in today's, climate. My view is that when you attend a meeting, you need to be really present. And I think people scrolling through emails and texting and, you know, jumping around screens isn't always helpful. Anybody have a thought about that? Marina, let's just come to you. Any thoughts about devices and meetings from you? What's your protocol with it?
Sorry, we are 4 of us here.
Yeah. Go on, let's hear from all of you. It's like a chat show.
Over. Our take is that we trust that people will be respectful, and that if we need to take a call or if there's an emergency, that we will step outside, but we prefer not having everyone on devices. So if we have somebody on a device taking notes, that's different, but it's easier face to face, making eye contact, and it just makes it more productive.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I think it is about, you know, if somebody's taking notes with it, no problem. If somebody's got an emergency and they've said, I might need to take a call and step outside, you know, we're human, we've got to be sensible with it. But I think it's really disrespectful when somebody's spent a lot of time preparing something for the meeting and nobody's listening to them because they're getting rid of their inbox, and there's a time and there's a place. So it's interesting just to think about, you know, how explicit are your group norms, and how often do you return to them, and to what extent do people really respect those norms as well? Jennifer, you've made a comment in the chat. Let's just hear from you.
So one thing that I feel like I really worked on as a lead over the last few years is being really careful about how to set the norms at the beginning of the year. I feel like as a new lead, my norms often were about starting on time, finishing on time, putting screens down, like just sort of like the mechanics of the meeting. But then when things came up as tension points with behavior or disagreements, it was like I had no teeth to manage those situations. So now when I'm in a situation when I create norms with a team, I just list those ones right off the bat. And I say, like, I think we can all agree that starting and finishing on time, putting devices down, of the mechanics, we can all agree, but the norms are going to focus on what we bring into meetings in terms of our attitudes and our outlooks and our professionalism. And I find that that helps guide meetings later on down the year, rather than just starting and finishing on time.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. And I think, you know, as a leader, there's a lovely quotation from George Bernard Shaw, which is, you know, the biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it ever took place. And, you know, it's perfect, isn't it? Because often we assume that people will understand the norms, but if we don't articulate them, and if we don't communicate them clearly, and if we don't keep reiterating them, they get lost in the melee of what everyone has to do. And, you know, one of the key things I think as a middle leader you have to think about is, you know, attend to the things that you value. So pay attention to the things that you really value. And if you think about your norms, what are the things that you really value in terms of the way that your team works together, particularly in a meeting situation? And then pay some real attention to that. Think carefully about what you want that to look like, and talk to your team about what they want it to look like, and build a really good shared understanding. If we kind of push on, again, we've talked a little bit about, you know, in meetings, does something need to be a discussion, or does it need to be a decision? And again, on your agenda, I think it's worth highlighting whether something is about building understanding and it's a discussion, and being clear about what decision has to be made. And if you can do that on the agenda and give it a time frame, and then lead that really tightly, again, your meetings can be much more productive. If we kind of think about decision-making processes, this is a really interesting piece. It's from a book called Leading in a Culture of Change by Michael Fullan, but it's from David Code, who was CEO of a big organization called Honeywell's. I'm just going to let you read it. Okay, let's see what we're thinking. Mark, what are you thinking when you read that? What are you drawing out of it?
I was thinking, don't ask me. The bit I struggled right at the start of it with that your job is to be right at the end of the meeting. I kept going around on that because that sounded very much like a sort of egotistical statement. So I was still trying to read through the rest of it to make sense of the beginning of it. So I'm trying to reword it in my head so that it becomes more of a collaborative thing rather than, my job is to be right at the end of the meeting. So that's where I was struggling a little bit with it, but I also yeah.
I think one of the things that kind of really draws me with that, because I think you're right, you do get stuck there because, we were talking at the start, weren't we, about culturally, in some cultures, people have made the decision before you even get to the meeting. And therefore you get there and the discussion is pointless because the decision has already been made. And I think for me, really effective leaders sometimes, take the discussion to the group. And then for me, it's about, maybe listening to everybody, and really good leaders are willing to change their view. Not always, but sometimes somebody will say something and, they're not doing the traffic light thing of saying red is red and green is green. They recognize that sometimes it's important to make a shift with things. And I think for me, again, if you kind of take that a step further, it's about being clear with your team about who makes the decision. So is it a consensus decision that you're making? Or is it that you're going to listen to the whole team, but actually as the leader, you're going to go away and think about it and make the decision? And I think, again, being explicit and communicating that very clearly with people can be really helpful. So with this, we need to make a consensus decision. Actually, I need to hear from all of you, and then I need to make a decision. Can be really, really powerful. I don't know if anybody else wants to come in and just comment on that quotation. Again, just pop me a hand up if you do. I think it's really interesting. Maybe it's one to take away and process for a bit longer. Go on, Sarah, let's hear from you. What are you thinking?
I've been inattentive in using my device because I just looked up the quote, and what I think is really interesting that Coach always also says is that he says, when he's talking about being right at the end of the meeting, not at the beginning, he uses an image that I think is really interesting. He talks about the mosaic picture of the decision you make, and that's what you've just been talking about, isn't it? It's having the humility to know that you haven't got the answers to every question, and neither should you if you're a leader. But that you're drawing from the expertise and the people in the group. So I love that. I love that image of the mosaic.
I think it's that whole thing, isn't it, of, kind of as a leader, sometimes you think that you're expected to have all of the answers. But as you grow as a leader, what you realize is that, the likelihood is that you are never going to have all of the answers, but nor do you need to. That's what you need your team for, because you need to figure out the answers together. And I think for me, figuring things out and togetherness are maybe underused and underrated concepts in leadership. So if we kind of take it a step further, sometimes with decision making, it's useful to use a tool. And for me, this is one that lots of you will be familiar with, but we don't always go back and use it. It's a SWOT analysis. And when you've got a decision to make, sometimes just working through this and thinking, what are the strengths of that decision? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities and what are the threats can be really valuable. And I think for me, giving people time to do this in advance of the meeting and think it through, and then bring their thoughts so that you can do a group one, can be really helpful. Because when you work through this, sometimes decisions are really easy to make. And I'm going to make you all laugh here, because I used this last year. We were thinking about moving house and we couldn't decide. And we were having these discussions over dinner, and it was like, should we, shouldn't we, should we, shouldn't we? And we were going round in circles. And of course, then I said, let's do a SWOT analysis. So I got the big piece of paper out and we worked through this. And it was really easy. it was really easy because the strengths of moving way outweighed the weaknesses. The opportunities of moving way outweighed the threats, and it was really visible. And I think when you're working with your team, sometimes coming back to a tool like this can really help. I think if we kind of move on again, there's that idea of who makes the decision, and again, being very clear about that. You know, is it you as the leader, or is it a consensus decision? I think it's fair to say that there will always be disagreement, but as the leader, maybe you've got to think about some of these ideas. Again, I'm just going to give you a minute to read them. Again, share some reflections or thoughts in the chat. Melanie, which one are you drawn to? Which one's grabbing your attention?
I think keeping the focus on the issue and not on the person is one that I think about. I think that because education is a caring profession, there's sometimes a lot of emotion involved, and it can be hard to separate that when you're talking about, you know, particularly problems or big high stakes issues. So remembering to separate that from the people is really important to me.
Yeah, it's a great point. Monica, what about you? You look like you're sitting somewhere lovely today. You've got a great background.
I needed to get out of my house. So I'm just sitting down here, but there's a lot of walkers. Sorry, so I'm trying to keep it quiet. I trying to listen to understand, not respond. I think it's something that I look personally into because I very quickly have a reaction and trying to learn how to, and then it kind of leads into also what Melanie said. It's the issue that's important, or different perspectives, but slowing down the reaction or response to the situation is just more to understand, I think, is something that I would like to focus on.
Yeah, I think, and you know, being in a meeting and getting people to listen is a really tricky thing sometimes, because people just want to share their view rather than listen to other people's. And I think, you know, one technique that I often used to use in the meeting is, tell me what you're hearing from the rest of the group. And again, it just moves people away from tunnel vision of their own perspective to really thinking about what are they hearing from other people. Simon, what are you drawn to here?
Online. Okay, so I think I was a couple of them. I think focusing on the issue was the one I was looking at the most. Focusing on the issue or the problem and not on the person that's telling you about the issue was a really important one. Again, listening to understand and not respond, and then really focusing on the solutions and having a solution-based thing. And I think that sort of goes on to a really important part of those meetings is the action points, right? So as you mentioned before, having at the end having action points and then being able to reflect on those action points in the following meeting makes people understand that, oh, we're actually following through things and this actually leads to something and it's a purposeful thing, right? So I think those were the ones that I was drawn to. So
yeah, and I love that idea of following up and following through with meetings and always reviewing progress, because otherwise what you do is you keep meeting and actually you achieve nothing over the long term, and keeping those big goals in mind really matters. Again, that's great point from you there. So for me, I'm going to be honest with you here. I have the concentration span of a goldfish. I really struggle to watch a film. I like things in 30-minute and hour bursts. So I'm much better in a meeting when somebody is facilitating the thinking and we're actually doing something that enables the thinking. And one of the things I would always encourage is that you sometimes build an activity in to make the decision, like a SWOT analysis, because what it does is it helps people to discuss things in an objective way and see the bigger picture. I also think it helps to make decisions again in a more objective way. And when you facilitate, if you're leading the meeting, you've got an opportunity to step back and just observe the discussion and really listen. I think it helps people to be really focused because they're doing something. It gets everyone involved. People tend to buy in more, so you've got better engagement. I also think it stops that stuckness where people are just eyeballing each other around the table and then people start plucking solutions out of the air. But it also encourages people to put ideas on the table that may be a little bit out of the box. So you get that creative and critical thinking. So, it might be that you actually get people to draw the desired state, and they might draw the current state in relation to something that perhaps you're thinking about. So it might be, that you're thinking about, what do we want our classrooms to look like? Draw out what they look like now. Let's draw out what we'd like them to look like, and just go around the table and get people to talk through what they've drawn. Again, it's a little bit more creative. It brings everybody to the table. Some of you will have used a fishbone analysis before. This is where perhaps you've got a problem. So for example, boys in your school or in your subject might not be achieving particularly well. That's the head of the fish. And then you might look at some of the issues that are causing that. And they're the blue bits, they're the big things. So it might be that, they seem really disengaged in lessons. Perhaps they're not completing homework. Perhaps you're seeing some behaviour issues. Flip that on its head. It might be that girls aren't achieving particularly well. What are the big issues that are there? And then underneath that, in the little white bits, what you do is you look at the details, the sub-issues. This works really, really well. I think I use it a lot when I'm working with schools. I give people a different colour pen. We draw it out on about 6 pieces of flip paper and put all of the desks together. And we just let people go. And they're having discussions with each other. They're writing things on. And then what we do is we have a look at it together. Again, if we pushed it on, a lightning round is a great strategy in a meeting. You have a topic like, let's think about how we can make our meetings better. People have to come up with 3 ideas on their own. They get 2 minutes to do it. And then they've got a maximum of 1 minute each to share their best idea. If you've got a problem with dominant voices or people who sit back and let everyone else do the work, this is a brilliant way of expecting everyone to put something on the table. And you can do it in about 10 minutes. You've got to be tight with the timing, but it works really, really well. And again, ideas generators. I don't know if any of you use this, but sometimes, again, if you've got an issue like, we need to improve homework, just get everybody blasting ideas onto post-it notes, sticking them on the table. You say to everybody, 5 is okay, 10 ideas is good, 15 ideas are great, 20 are amazing. Might be that you want to improve reading. Doesn't matter what the issue is, but just blasting ideas down and then get people to sort them into categories and groups and then start the discussion from there. So just a few ideas of how we can kind of push things forward. What I want to do now is just give you about, 6 or 7 minutes of cafe time just at the end here to maybe process a bit of that, to share some ideas, to say hello to each other, to have some discussion. So again, just pop into the groups, share your top tips, and maybe something that you might change as a result of today. Let's just pop you into your groups. Here we go. Are we ready? Let's have some really good discussions. I'll share this slide in. Just checking that you can all get in. If you need any help, if you just click the little 4 square button on the menu, it will let you in. Just shout up if you're struggling. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Alan. Sorry, my computer just dropped me when you were trying to put me in the meeting room.
So what I'll do is I'll just pop you in one. Okay,
Sure,
I'll pop you
great.
into the first one.
Thank
There you
you.
go. No problem. Alice. Hi, Simon.
Hi.
How are things? Good? Good at
Okay.
WOB?
Yeah,
Busy.
that's okay. Busy, yeah, busy. Online for the last, I don't know, 3 weeks or something. So
yeah, long days, tough times.
Yeah.
And sending all of you, I think, a big hug when you're working online, because it's so hard, so hard. So I think we just about got everybody back. Just give everybody a minute. Yeah, I think we've just about got everybody. Okay, so we're on 9:58. We've got 2 minutes to go. Hopefully, we've got nobody who has suffered death by meeting today. I think we've got everybody back. I hope, although it was short, a chance just to kind of process and have some discussions with colleagues and to share a couple of ideas has been helpful. As always, you know, I think I've shared with you all before, I love when I go anywhere, a trip to the gift shop. And I always buy a pencil and a notebook. But I have lots of small children in my family. So I always end up with something fluffy, cuddly and unicorn-like. Again, it would be great just before we go, if you could just share one thing in the chat that maybe you're going to take away from the gift shop today, something perhaps that you've heard from someone else, or a reflection that you've had that might just shift things for you. I know that it's a really busy time for you all. So I think just to close by saying a really big thank you to you all for joining us today, for joining with each other, for being so great in terms of participation as well. It's great to have you as part of our community. This is our last Middle Leader Café for this academic year, but we'll be starting them again in September. So I hope that you all have a really good summer when we actually get there. Just make sure that you stay safe, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. If you need anything, please get in touch with Sarah or myself, and we'll really look forward to seeing you in the new academic year. Okay, Sarah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that before we finish.
You've said it all. It was absolutely lovely. Yes, and thank you all for your contributions today. Helen, you're great, and pulling everybody in on the conversations. Have a wonderful summer. Take a look at the events page on ECIS and see whether there are other things that you'd like to join us with. Do get in touch whenever you have a question or a suggestion. And Chris, I want to hear your stories because they sounded really interesting. They were enticing, and then we never got to hear them.
I wonder if we can take a picture of the group before we go, because this is our last one. Do we get a big smile for everybody? Again, if you can put your camera on, great. If you don't want to be on, again, switch your camera off. Let's have a big summer smile from everybody. Great, thank you. Thank you for being such good sports. Take care of yourselves and we'll see you soon. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.